professional. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you three of Monarch's experts in the field of mental health: Dr. John Latz, Mary Catherine Carmen, and Desiree Matthews. Dr. John Latz serves as our Associate Medical Director for Crisis and Urgent Care Services. Since 1996, he has been a board-certified member of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology and a diplomat on the National Board of Medical Examiners. He previously served as the Associate Chief Medical Officer at Broughton Hospital in Morganton and has been in private practice since 1998. Mary Catherine Carmen is a physician assistant on our behavioral health outpatient staff, caring for patients of all ages from 6 years old through adulthood. She also serves on the staff of Monarch's Wake Behavioral Health Urgent Care in Raleigh. Mary Catherine completed a psychiatry fellowship through Novant Health, continuing there in the Psychiatry Emergency Department before joining Monarch in January of 2020. Since 2016, Desiree Matthews has been part of Monarch's behavioral health clinical staff. Her primary clinical focus and expertise is on the treatment of bipolar disorder, treatment-resistant major depressive disorder, and drug-induced movement disorders in adults. Now that you know a little bit about us and the work that we do, we would like to get to know all of you. You will see on your screen a quick poll. What are you hoping to learn from today's webinar? Please choose from the following: tips for managing my own mental health, ways to help a family member or friend with their mental health, general information and resources on mental health, and information about Monarch's services and programs. Great. Okay. Just wait another minute. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn tonight's presentation over to Dr. Latz.
Thank you, Jody, for the very warm welcome, and welcome to our presentation tonight. My name is John. I'm one of the psychiatrists that has the privilege of working with Monarch, and I'll be talking with you this evening about mental wellness in children and adolescents. So one of the things that with this population really pays dividends is focusing on the positive and reinforcing the positive in our children and our teenagers. Life is hard enough growing up in those age ranges without good nurturing support. So one of the things I want you to focus on is looking out for those positive changes that you see in your children. You know, the hugs you get when they're younger that you miss when they're teenagers. You know, their resilience, how they bound back from adversity, whether it's at school or on the athletic field, and encouraging the problem solving that comes with that, and really kind of inspiring their curiosity. So never start out a conversation with a child or an adolescent on a negative, critical, judgmental note. Always try and focus on the positive and launch on that. So I need to preface this by saying most of our statistics that you're going to see are really hard data from pre-COVID. And even though we're just emerging from COVID and it's still what we would consider new, from a scientific point of view, the data is just not there yet to reliably give you accurate numbers. Now, I can tell you the general feeling is that we're seeing an increase across the spectrum of ages and conditions related to the stresses of COVID. But approximately, data from the CDC shows about 10% of youth and children pre-COVID were struggling with some mental health issue, whether it's anxiety or depression or attention deficit disorder, behavioral conduct problems. We do know that isolation from COVID has increased that, and it wouldn't surprise me if in 5 years we're looking at data that is double, maybe even triple this. But approximately 10 to 15% of children pre-COVID were struggling with depression. And if they had depression, there was a pretty good chance that there was something else going on as well. So it's a lot more common than we think. And who's at risk? Well, childhood should be a time of safety, of nurturance, of unconditional love, yet within the boundaries of discipline. So when you have something go wrong in that paradigm, it really sets the stage for problems to develop. And so obviously any exposure to violence, whether it's domestic violence at home or violence in the neighborhood or at school, we certainly know that even though we love our children and we hold them in high esteem, a lot of their sense of self-esteem comes from their peers. And so when they are bullied, it really beats them down. And so we know bullying is just a huge predictor for problems with mental health in this population. Isolation from COVID, poverty, abuse, physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, neglect, all play roles. And we may not think about it, but some children struggle with very serious medical issues. For example, juvenile onset diabetes, where almost overnight a child has to become an adult in terms of monitoring their blood sugar and administering their insulin. And so all these are risk factors that can kind of go into play. So these are things you kind of want to have on your radar screen to look out for. And again, what do we see? We see the same thing in children as we do in adults. Anxiety, depression, mood disorders, behavioral problems, attention deficit disorder. Unfortunately, we see substance abuse starting at even earlier ages and often with tragic consequences. So they're really not a lot different from the disorders that we see in adulthood. We don't see as many what we would call psychotic disorders in childhood as we do in adulthood. That's probably the one distinction. And here's what I want you to look out for. Nobody's going to know your children better than you. And so what you're looking for is a departure in their normal behaviors and patterns. If they're very social and all of a sudden they're isolated, they won't come out of their room, they don't want to go to school, they have a headache or stomach ache, or they get more medically focused and preoccupied. Certainly irritability, rage, anger, behavioral outbursts. And then, in my mind, the two red flags are if they start talking about death or suicide and substance abuse, because substance abuse can bring them to a very dark place where inherently in that addiction, their judgment is impaired so that they may act on something terribly tragic. So that's what you want to look out for. And when you see some of these things, that's when you want to get help. So what do? Well, the first thing I would tell you to do is you'll learn more from your children by observing and listening than you will by preaching and yelling. So don't be afraid to have that conversation. I remember a young teenage boy, he was 14, and his chore in the family was doing dishes after the family had eaten. And one day he just yelled, "Why do people have to eat?" And his mother kind of looked at him and said, "That's unusual." I said, "Come talk to me." And he came back to her thinking he was going to get a lecture. And she just said, "You are such a wonderful part of our family. I love you to the moon and back. You are the best kid ever. But it looks like something's troubling you. What's up?" And he said, "Mom, I wake up, I have all these emotions." He's in the middle of these pubertal hormonal changes. He doesn't know what to do with them. So that in that moment, the mother approached, communicated, listened, reaffirmed what his concerns were, and was able to engage him. And that is so important, because if we don't ask, they won't tell. If we don't listen, we won't hear. Always remember 911 remains the emergency hotline across the country. 988 is the mental health hotline, and that's active in most major metropolitan areas. And the kids can even text that if they feel more comfortable texting than talking. And how you can help, again, listen, educate yourself about what they're going through, be collaborative with their providers, whether it's their pediatrician or family practice doctor. Parenting in this age is very challenging and very stressful. So you have to make sure to take care of yourself too. If you're getting burned out, if you just don't know what to do, seek help, ask for help. And when the children are having difficulty, always loop in the academic arena as well, because that can be such a huge piece of what's happening in their life. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Catherine Carmen, who'll be providing information about wellness in the 20s and 30s.
Thank you so much, Dr. Latz. So we will talk now about mental wellness in young adults. So thinking 20s and 30s, kind of 18 and up and through that time frame. Just a little roadmap for that. First, we will think about what do data and statistics tell us? Who is at risk in this age group? What are we at risk for? What are tips for maintaining wellness? Then, if something's not right, what are some of those signs for depression, anxiety, and mental illness? And then, of course, wrapping up with when to seek help and how. Right. So this is data that is gathered from 2020. But as Dr. Latz has pointed out, there's so much change that's gone on, especially in the last 3 years, and even ongoing as it relates to the pandemic and as it relates to the mental health landscape. Um, but what was found in 2020 was that 21% of US adults ages 18 and older have any mental illness, but the highest percentage amongst adults 18 and older with any mental illness in 2020 happened to be amongst 18 to 25-year-olds. Next, we look at the number of US adults, again, who are 18 and older in 2020 that reported either any mental illness or substance use disorder, and that was 73.8 million. One caveat to that is that's people reporting those things. We know, especially related to substance use disorders, that free reporting can be difficult to come by. And so there may be even higher numbers than that for 2020. And then lastly, suicide was found to be the second leading cause of death amongst US adults between the ages of 25 and 34 years old. All right. So I wanted to highlight just kind of what's unique or specific maybe to this time frame in our 20s and 30s. And just some commonalities amongst people in those age ranges. For a lot of people, that may be a time where either you're already a parent or maybe you become a parent or enter a caregiver role in some capacity. We know, medically speaking, that for the mom or birthing parent, that there's increased risk of mental illness surrounding pregnancy. Most commonly, you think about postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. That can also occur during pregnancy at higher rates. Um, for really anyone involved in caregiving for a child, that you take on new parental stress, probably new roles, new responsibilities, whether that's with time, finances. Um, Also thinking about, 18 and older, that's a time when we typically are transitioning outside of maybe our original family of origin. Um, and so that may involve continuing education for people. Um, we know that student loan debt, especially federal student loan debt, is really prevalent in the United States. The cost of education can be high in many instances. It was found in March of 2022 that there were reportedly 43 million individuals in the United States that had outstanding federal loan debts. Employment, maybe we're 18 and up, we're entering the employment workforce. We know that mental illness can really impact our ability to secure and maintain employment. We know that has effects for businesses and industries and our economy overall. Um, Thinking about social media, that might be something you associate more readily to adolescence. But really, it's very rare that, US adults, especially in our 20s and 30s, are not accessing social media very regularly. Um, with, smartphone access, it was created, I know, for many of us as or those of us that maybe were around in the evolution and the kind of beginnings of social media, and it can be really widely accepted as a tool to connect and to feel like you're in tune with what's going on in others' lives. But there's a lot of data and studies that really show it's creates a lot more opportunity for comparison to others, that folks can struggle more with negative self-image, worsen that sense and feeling of social isolation. That was especially, I felt, I would say, amongst the pandemic as well, where in-person connection was harder to come by and gatherings weren't happening at the same rate. So also, cyberbullying, as Dr. Latz pointed, that's certainly prevalent in like our school settings and amongst youth and adolescents, but we also are quite open to that through social media apps and those avenues. Lastly, substance use is especially prevalent amongst our 20s and 30s. Found this statistic to be interesting again from 2020. It was reported that 61 million people in the United States met criteria for binge alcohol use, and the highest percentage were adults ages 18 to 25 years old. So next, I wanted to think about what are some ways that we can prevent mental illness from developing and tips again to maintain wellness. So I wanted to break these up into what's internal, what kind of can we control about ourselves and our day-to-day lives, what's external to us. Internally, of course, we know healthy diet, prioritizing nutrition has unlimited benefits, really. Regular exercise is a wonderful tool to manage stress, to manage anxiety. We know that engaging in self care regularly has become a much more popular kind of term day to day and in the mental health space, and that can be really, really useful for people. How we speak to ourselves and about ourselves. We may think, oh, we formed those patterns when we're young and we can't change that, but we certainly can adapt that. We can recognize those unhealthy patterns and work to speak positively, again, to and about ourselves. Having healthy routines, healthy habits that keep us grounded, especially when life has many transitions and changes, as we just talked about, and prioritizing sleep. This has huge health benefits. Externally, just thinking about some of those factors we just mentioned. If it's social media usage, how do we set those boundaries? Maybe that's time, kind of setting screen time limits for ourselves. Maybe it's certain apps that are not as helpful to us, limiting how we engage with those apps. With substance use, of course, again, setting healthy limits and boundaries. That might look like, limiting certain interactions, who you're with. If you notice that you engage in substance use more frequently around somebody or in certain settings, it's just harder to say no, or you make choices that you regret. How do you set those limits for yourself? Looking for ways to really connect with others. That might be certain hobbies like a running group or different activities that really leave you feeling connected and seen and heard, and finding what those community groups and settings are for you. Of course, again, in that same vein, finding support with family and friends, finding support through medical providers when you're struggling, and those different roles that and responsibilities that we take on, having balance between those, not giving all of ourselves to one avenue like work and then feeling really burnt out, stretched really thin in family and those other arenas. So, like Dr. Latz has already touched on, some of these signs can be similar, but wanted to, of course, highlight what are the signs of mental illness. And for United States adults, it's most common to experience anxiety disorders. Second most common is major depressive disorders. Um, Signs can be feeling really down, feeling hopeless, like things will never change, noticing more crying episodes that are happening. Some people may never have crying episodes, but they have a lot of irritability or easily agitated, easily frustrated. We may isolate more, withdraw from people. We may find we're doing our same hobbies, but we're not enjoying them. We just have a lack of interest in things that can progress to where we don't even engage in those hobbies. You don't even have the motivation to do those. Um, in, say, education, work settings, being with our kids, we can notice really difficult times with concentration, frequently worrying. Our thoughts may feel like they're racing. We're trying to keep all the plates spinning at one time. Physical symptoms can be like chest tightness. You may feel your heart fluttering or heart palpitations, shortness of breath, kind of a difficulty swallowing, even disturbance with sleep and appetite are common. Of course, signs of more progressed depression would be thoughts of death, not wanting to live anymore. That may start out as feeling like a burden to others or picturing other people in your life going on without you. And that can develop into a desire to harm ourselves, either for self-harm or with the goal of suicide. So, of course, we want to be really helpful and useful to everyone here about, this large question. When do we seek help? How do we do that, whether it's for ourselves or someone else? I thought this graphic was just helpful to highlight, what it is that might be going through your own mind if it's you looking to seek mental health treatment, and the mind of the person that you're talking to about mental health treatment, even if it's a loved one, a close family member, a close friend you deeply trust. They have their own stigmas and stereotypes and fears that they're trying to overcome to just even consider mental health and mental help in some capacity. So I just think that's really helpful. If we can keep that in mind for ourselves and other people, I think we can all go into those conversations just more open and accepting and with patience around it. But some signs for when would you definitely need to seek help. Like Dr. Latz pointed out, if you notice a really marked change for you or someone else in your mood or your emotions, um, one tip that I just think can be helpful is maybe somebody doesn't really feel open to getting treatment for like crying episodes or feeling stressed out or racing thoughts because they might think, oh, I coped with that really well in the past. I'll get through this. This will pass. But maybe it's physical symptoms that they're talking about more readily. They're more open to seeking treatment for. And maybe that's an angle to take with someone like, hey, I know you're exhausted. You are not sleeping well and you're doing everything you can. Maybe talking to somebody about anxiety or seeing if they could help in some capacity. Of course, seeking help anytime there's risk of harm to self or others, the thoughts of self-harm, suicide, of course, thoughts of hurting others. And again, just asking, how do we do that? Ask open, unassuming questions. Try to really be an active listener, really meet the person where they're at. They may, again, have a lot of these fears. And I think really checking in regularly speaks volumes to people, to be patient with them, not expect them to overnight be open to something that really scares them, but to say, I'm going to keep showing up, keep asking questions, and of course, utilize the professionals. Um, so with that, I will now turn it over to Desiree Matthews, and she will talk to us about mental health in our later years, our 50s and beyond.
Thank you so much, Mary Catherine, and thank you, Dr. Latz, for bringing us up to speed to now talking about older adults. Next slide. So we're going to go over kind of the same format, take a look at, who's at risk, what do the numbers look like in terms of mental health concerns and substance abuse in older adults. Going to talk about preventative measures. So what can we do to help us age in a healthy manner? How do we protect our brain? And then finally review signs and symptoms of depression with the focus of older adults. What does that look like in older adults? Next slide. So unfortunately, in older adults, it's common to have a mental health illness or diagnosis. About 15% of adults age 60 and over do have a mental health disorder. We know that prevalence rates can vary. Again, this is pre-COVID, about 14.5% of adults 50 and up in 2020 had a mental health diagnosis. We know that those folks that are 85 years and older, they actually have the highest rate of suicide in 2020. And to some surprise, there's a lot of adults 65 and older with actually a substance use disorder. So this is not something that is just isolated to kind of, trying things out in your teens, your young adulthoods, but this can start in older adulthood. It can persist and kind of, continue on as we get older. Next slide. So when we think about aging, growing older, we come to this concept of healthy aging. And healthy aging is a concept where we think about creating an environment and opportunities that help people continue to do what they value throughout their lifespan. So thinking about, maybe I really enjoyed running or cycling, finding ways to continue being physically active, even if it's maybe changing things around a little, can help our lifespan. So this can be lifestyle factors, so things that we can certainly control to many degrees. The environment that we live in, this can contribute to aging. Do we have access to fresh, clean water? Do we have a park that's safe to walk in? Do we have access to, a grocery store or farmer's market with fresh fruits and vegetables? These are all factors that come into healthy aging. And then, of course, we have non-modifiable factors, things we can't control, like our genetics, what we inherit from mom and dad. Next slide. So focusing on prevention. So with healthy aging, really the goal is to continue to be able to do things that we enjoy, to feel valued, to participate in the community, to be part of family in an active way. So really it kind of comes down to the pillars that we should continue. And again, from childhood, adulthood, and as we get older, is keep moving, exercise and physical activity. We know through many studies that exercise can not only help prevent depression, but it can actually help improve our response to antidepressant treatment. So exercise and physical activity is very great. And it can be small. It can be taking a 10-minute walk. It can be stretching, yoga, even doing something on YouTube, kind of a home-friendly workout. There's a lot of ways to be physically active. And of course, nutrition, minimizing processed foods, sugar-added foods like sodas, sweet tea, energy drinks, and getting a good night's sleep. We know that a healthy brain requires good sleep. When you have chronically poor sleep, you can actually have shrinkage of your brain volume, and this could certainly lead to poor outcomes such as mental health concerns. And of course, avoiding and eliminating alcohol consumption. If you are smoking nicotine or tobacco still, it's never too late to quit. We have a really great resource, NC Quit Line, here in North Carolina to help people stop smoking. And of course, managing stress and, really knowing to recognize maybe when stress is turning into a bit more of a chronic problem or perhaps even depression or anxiety. Next slide. So one myth that I feel really needs to be addressed is that depression is not a normal part of growing older. It's not normal. This is not something that just comes with the territory. Depression is a treatable medical condition in older adults, and older adults are at greater risk of developing depression. Chronic illness can increase the risk of developing depression, and as we grow older, we certainly may develop a chronic illness or two. Older adults are often misdiagnosed or undertreated for depression. Oftentimes, people may be going to primary care, as Mary Catherine had mentioned. Maybe they're having GI upset. Maybe they're feeling nauseous, sick to their stomach. They're fatigued. Maybe they're having poor concentration. And older adults, they certainly may, get brushed to the side thinking, oh, maybe this is part of a medical condition. You have chronic pain. Maybe it's related to that. And the depression may actually not be recognized. Next slide. So warning signs for depression, and we can put this into a bit of a case study. So, you have yourself or maybe your friend Sue, and Sue's maybe normally very active in the community. She's retired, but enjoys going to her place of worship. She participates, with walks with her neighbors. She likes to, video chat with her grandson, her grandkids. And then suddenly Sue starts to withdraw. Suddenly she's not going to church so often. She's skipping her walking groups. Maybe she's ignoring phone calls from family. And next thing you know, you go to check on Sue and Sue has the blinds shut. Maybe she's lost weight, not sleeping well. Maybe it looks like she's not taking care of herself as well. Maybe the house is a little bit disorganized and that's not like Sue. Maybe Sue's complaining of a lot of aches and pains, headaches, stomach upset. So these can all be warning signs of depression. Sue may also mention things about not wanting to be alive or saying, oh, you guys would be better off without me. These are all signs that someone could be having depression, whether that be yourself, a friend, or a loved one. Next slide. So seeking help, especially for older adults, a lot of times they have a primary care doctor. They may have one or more doctors, including a specialist. So oftentimes, primary care may be the first place that depression comes up. Again, maybe they're complaining about headaches, pain, stomach aches, and they may be seeing a primary care doctor. Certainly keep in mind with older adults, it is important to talk and speak with somebody that specializes in treatment for mental health in older adults because with medications, treatment options, sometimes it is a little bit different when we consider all the medications that they're on. Things have to be a little bit more nuanced in some cases, but overall, people need to know that depression is treatable and it's not just with medication. Talk therapy can help. If it's not formal talk therapy, with a mental health professional in an office setting, certainly places of worship, pastors, priests may be a good first place if someone's not comfortable going right to a medical professional. But talk therapy is, you know, sometimes just as good of a treatment as medication. And sometimes people need both. And then, of course, there's holistic measures that you can add on, like diet and exercise. But never be afraid to reach out and potentially, if you have a loved one or family member, just listen to them. Listen. Perhaps even offer to seek help with them because maybe they don't even know where to start to look.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Latz, Mary Catherine, Desiree. That was such helpful information. And all of you provided really valuable tools that I think we can all benefit from. So at this time, we will have our experts answer your questions. If you have not submitted a question and you would like to, please type it in the chat and remember to leave out personal information. Also, if our experts are not able to address your question due to time constraints, we will make sure to follow up with you. So we'll go ahead. And this is for nobody in particular, so feel free to just go ahead and answer any of these questions. In addition to helping us cope with mental health issues, can you please provide some thoughts and suggestions that will help our partners, family, and friends to be more aware and supportive?
Well, if I may, I think education is so important. And in today's age, it's so accessible, but making sure you're getting accurate educational material. Probably the most non-biased source of that is going to be through our National Institute of Health's National Institute of Mental Health. And that website has an abundance of educational materials for family and for patients. A lot of it geared towards how does the family help the patient get through this season in their life. So I think one of the places you have to focus on is education.
Thank you.
I would add as well to that, if you are, putting yourself, or if you are the patient in that instance and you are trying to, that sounds like from the phrasing of the question, it would be, how do I get my again, friends, family members, or partners to be more aware. And I think something that can be really helpful is if you're trying to help a loved one along and it's something you haven't walked through personally, it can be, confusing of like, I just want to be able to read your mind or know what's going on or know how you're feeling. And I think with the person that's struggling, it's helpful to be really as clear and direct as possible about what you need. And that may not be easy to identify, but just not being afraid to give feedback to, say, your partner or whoever's trying to help you, and trying to think, I think they're trying to help me. I think they have the best interest, but to be able to point out, this wasn't necessarily so helpful. I think you intended this, but it wasn't helpful. And then point out what does help. Gosh, that was really affirming to me. That really helped me get to my appointment that day. Because we all want to know, generally speaking, how to help. We all tend to typically have good intentions. We may just not always get it right. Um,
I think another distinction that is important is the concept of compassion versus empathy. And compassion can be like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. But empathy is trying to be with your family member in that moment without judgment, just being there. I remember in medical school, one of my British professors, a very austere gentleman, said, sometimes there's nothing you can do for the patient except be with them. And just that presence, it can help them feel loved and supported. But try and approach that from a point of view of empathy, where you're kind of in it with them at the moment. There's a wonderful psychologist named Brene Brown, Brene Brown, and she's got some wonderful YouTubes and and TED Talks that talk about this important distinction. So I think being empathic with the family member is important and can carry a lot of weight.
Love that. Thank you. We talked a little bit about cognitive health, um, but if we can talk a little bit more, how can we maintain cognitive health as we age? And does cognitive decline happen to everyone? Like, no matter what we do, is it just going to happen?
Yeah, I can take this one. So, in terms of kind of keeping your brain healthy, kind of that cognitive aging that we want to prevent. So, again, being mindful of your alcohol intake, not using nicotine products. Managing your blood pressure. So if you do have hypertension, make sure that you're taking your medication and kind of meeting your goals with your primary care doctor on that. But certainly, when we think of cognitive decline, mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, as many people refer it to in the medical community, this is a situation where we start to maybe forget things. We're forgetting, maybe where we put our keys. We had a conversation with somebody that day, and then we can't recall it. This is something that usually family members can notice behavior changes. And this is not normal. And in fact, this can actually lead to, in a percentage of people, to a condition called dementia. But the difference between dementia and MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, is with mild cognitive impairment, usually that person can continue on day to day without any impairment. So yeah, it might be a pain that you've forgotten your keys, but you might still be able to drive, right? Or you can still balance your checkbook. You can still go to the grocery store. But certainly mild cognitive impairment is a risk factor for later on going on developing a type of dementia like Alzheimer's. But again, cognitive impairment, having trouble with your memory, this can be a symptom of depression. So making sure that you get screened for depression if you're noticing memory problems, focus problems developing, making sure that you go to your primary care doctor. There's medical conditions like B12 levels are off, vitamin levels, thyroid levels. So it's really important that if you do notice, problems with your focus, get checked out by a primary care doctor or even a mental health care professional. And certainly that is a big reason for people to come into the office, is because they say, hey, I can't focus, I can't work. But it actually ends up being a symptom of their depression rather than true mild cognitive impairment or dementia.
I think that's an excellent point, Desiree, is kind of the medical screening and the medical workup, because there are so many things medically that can contribute to cognitive issues, and certainly, not the least of which are correctable medical issues. And in this age range, we're almost always dealing with polypharmacy or multiple medications, and not dismissing the fact that we might be having some medication side effects or interactions that could be contributing as well. The other thing I would say here is learn something new. If I have to teach something, I'm going to know it better at the end of my lecture than at the beginning. So in retirement, take up a new hobby. Keep yourself cognitively active and in an active learning role, and that'll keep those neurons firing a little longer.
That's really interesting. Instead of just saying, oh, I'm having a senior moment, maybe it's not a senior moment, right? That was really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Can you please share some coping strategies pertaining to grief and loss? When we begin to lose our parents and loved ones, what suggestions do you have to help us process and manage our grief?
Well, I think if anybody tells you, oh, just give it time, you'll get over it, you're not getting good advice. What I would tell you is, if somebody or something is important in your life, you never get over it. But what you can do is get through it. And with help and support of your clinical team and your family, you can get through it. But that's a time not to hesitate asking for help. And there are specific psychologists and therapists that specialize in grief and bereavement counseling. Some of the best that I've ever encountered work in conjunction with hospice. And a lot of times that counseling is free or low cost. So that's just something to recognize, that sense of loss is important and it's normal. I would be more concerned if you lost somebody significant in your life and you're like, whatever, that would tell me there's more of an issue there. But one day at a time, one foot in front of the other, and with help, you'll get through it.
What about finding the right therapist? What advice can you share for finding a therapist for our own specific situations, whether it's aging or if we're parenting teenagers with mental health issues? How do we know who to go to for that particular issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get this a lot in my clinical practice. Do you know who would be a good fit for me? And that's going to be really, individualized, personalized. So usually I say, hey, well, what are maybe the top two things that you'd like to work on? Oftentimes, if someone's going through concerns with PTSD or trauma, asking questions to a therapist. If you're online, you're looking through a list of providers like psychologytoday.com, searching for somebody that has experience in trauma that maybe provides EMDR. There are certainly, therapists just as, providers. Maybe we specialize in children, adults, or, older persons. So, sometimes just reading the bio online or talking to your, medical provider, if you have one, for a referral, could be helpful.
Yeah, that was something I was thinking as well, Desiree, of just to think about, are there certain things that they specialize in, especially amongst like adolescents? It may be gender identity, sometimes eating disorders, other specialized things that you can either search or kind of seek out an interest in. Um, I think also maybe in line with this question is to think about, especially if it's maybe your first experience with therapy, to just try to go into any sort of a therapy relationship open-minded and just to help with realistic expectations and goals for therapy. I think we all can have different perceptions of what that therapy relationship might look like, oh, it's going to be advice giving, or it's going to really validate me or how I feel about my spouse or whatever it might be. But to just realize, they are trained professionals that want to help you reach your goals, and they sometimes are going to ask things that might feel unrelated, but they're not to be nosy. They're to help know you as best they can and help every way that they can. And it is okay to try different people and to develop rapport. I always encourage my patients, if they're seeing someone that just hasn't been a fit, it's not a taboo thing in mental health to ask to see someone different. But again, to go in open-minded and give someone a try.
Thank you. I have one more question. We're running out of time, but I'm just gonna pose this last question. Do you have any advice when aging parents resist getting help for depression and anxiety?
Did my kids call you?
I am not at liberty to share.
Yeah. That is so common, especially because some of the older generations still have this stigma against behavioral health. And, it's important for us to help them understand that, we're here to help, and that just because physically they may be not as robust as they were in their 20s and 30s, it doesn't mean that mentally they have to struggle. And Desiree just presented some excellent material there. So I think, you want to support them. One of the things that I run into with stigma about mental health is I'll tell them, and I'm dating myself, there's no Star Trek force field around your brain that protects it from having difficulty. If I was to take a brain out and plop it on a table next to your spleen, a kidney, or a lung, it's just an organ. And just like you can have an electrical abnormality in the heart that can cause an irregular heartbeat, sometimes you can have something like that happen in the brain. And let's tackle it. Let's get it done. And like Desiree said, sometimes they may not know where to start, and that may be the biggest thing, is helping them know who to call or where to go to be assessed and helped.
Yeah, I like that, Dr. Latz. A lot of times with my patients and talking with families, kind of relating it to medical concerns, with diabetes or hypertension, you go to the doctors, you talk about treatments. It's not all medication. There's diet, lifestyle recommendations, there's medications, there's different interventions, and really relating that to mental health, it's very similar. We have medications, we have talk therapy, we have other holistic measures that you can take, just as you would with a medical condition. So really putting that kind of really on the same bar, that mental health is not taboo, that it is treatable, and not everybody is about medication. So I think if you start kind of throwing out the word medications to a family member, loved one, oh, maybe you need to take a pill, that might not go over too well, because a lot of people are a little resistant or hesitant. They don't want to just take another pill. They really want to understand what's going on with them first, and simply having that first conversation with somebody they already trust, like a primary care doctor, or if they feel more comfortable, coming to see one of us at Monarch, a therapist, a specialist that can, just dig a little bit deeper so they can help understand what's going on.
I'm going to give my parents your number. All right, so now we are out of time. And I would like to share some resources, with the first slide highlighting Monarch services. And if you would like to begin Monarch services, please reach out to the number listed on your screen. The second slide features national agencies for your reference. Don't worry if you didn't catch the information, because we're going to be emailing these resources to all of you with the recording of the webinar. So as we say goodbye, we want to thank our speakers once more, Dr. Latz, Mary Catherine, Desiree, for your time and valuable mental health information. Many thanks to all of you attending and for setting aside time to find out more about mental health. We have one